Hello, everyone. This is Alfred Edmond Jr. with Black Enterprise. Welcome to Beyond the Hype. And we're going to have a really powerful conversation. Let me lay out before I introduce my guest what the hype is. We're in the midst of this major conversation about racial equity and social justice in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And of course, since then, Breonna Taylor, and the hashtags go on and on and on. And now we're seeing major corporate response. And the question becomes, how much of this is performative justice? How much of this is things that there is the right thing to do, but should have been done a long time ago? And then how much of this is going to be the systemic changes that need to happen, both inside corporations and outside corporations, that's really going to move the needle on all of this conversation? And I need to put a period on one part of that. Many of the people who work for these corporations are saying, yes, this outward messaging is great, but it doesn't reflect what's happening to us inside the corporation as workers, as laborers, as entrepreneurs who do business with the corporation or not. And so I got the perfect guest for this conversation. Dee Marshall is the CEO and founder of Diverse and Engaged LLC. Now, many of you know Dee serves people in so many ways on a national capacity as a speaker, as an author. She and I co-host a radio show together.
Yep.
Lifted Up Radio.
Yep.
She knows the founder of Girlfriend's Prey. So we know that she wears multiple hats and serves people in so many amazing ways as a national figure. But she is really, really deeply versed. And Dee, I want to kind of start with this subject. Dee Marshall, who really connects the dots in your work, Dee, between public policy,
yep,
private practice, social justice, and racial equity. That your career, and then let's give a little bit of background, Wall Street, your work on the Hill, diversity on the Hill, your work with corporations, obviously through your company. You really, in a very unique way over the course of your career, connect all of those institutional systemic dots that we're all talking about in terms of whether this is a true tipping point in the nation in terms of moving forward on inclusion, diversity, equity, particularly for African Americans.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. I mean, and thank you for this conversation. I think it's important for us to talk, to have the conversation and to really track what's going on in terms of how corporations are responding. And I think it's important for us to frame and to language it. I think, so I'm just happy to be here. So, yeah.
So we've seen all level of response from, let's take Aunt Jemima off the bottle once and for all. And, the degree to which people care about that or not varies depending on who you're talking to. All the way to major corporations like Lowe's and JP Morgan Chase and Walmart earmarking millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars for everything from hiring more Black people into their companies to financing or supporting Black-owned businesses. And remember, this is all happening during a pandemic, so you're talking about Black businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. Many of these programs existed before this current wave of crisis, but now they're leaning in many ways, if not creating new programs. When you look at the spectrum of corporate response, what do you see as mattering in the long run, and what do you see as, I don't want to call it window dressing, but it's more kind of performative branding, image change versus the kind of real changes that you work with corporations to try to achieve, that you've been working with them before, again, the current crisis situation?
Yeah. So I see real change. Well, let's start with the window dressing is when, and just to frame it, right? We are in a global or amid a global reckoning of racism against Black people in America, right? And so that's just where we are. And so we had the US, and let's just talk largely about Fortune 500 corporations who play really, really big. And many of them, most of them, responding immediately that Black Lives Matter and that they are anti-racist. And so the window dressing, of course, would be the obvious if there was just a message. Of course, window dressing. If there was just And then we go a step further. There were some just with a message, but with a message and then a financial contribution. And then in some ways, financial contribution, that in some ways is window dressing. Why? Because some of those corporations, many of them are the companies who were recipients of the stimulus, the CARES. And so the money, even for many corporations that, they wrote really large checks to civil rights and social justice institutions, specifically on bail funds, and now they're big proponents of racial and social justice. Was not their money to begin with. And so some of that is window dressing, right? Not just that you made a donation, but was it a sacrifice in terms of the donation? So once it is a sacrifice and it wasn't something that, again, was already earmarked, and Black people in particular were already impacted by what it is that they received, let's just say, that's a whole nother conversation, But that's the first part of that. But what happens is when you move out of window dressing is when you address the systemic racism within the corporate walls, because the window dressing is what you do external facing, where you have high reputational risk. It's where everybody is basically looking at you, big brand, to see what it is that you are going to do, how you're going to respond. Not just that there's a message of Black Lives Matter, and not just that there's a message of you being anti-racist, but that there was a contribution of something meaningful, and that was a sacrifice and not from stimulus funds. Now, certainly they will never admit to that, but you can just track the way the money is moving. But the next step is, what are you doing in terms of getting your hands dirty within your own house, the corporation, to look at all of the areas where Black people have been oppressed or victims of racism, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of the path of how you move, and what looks like window dressing, and then move to real systemic change. And that would be those corporations right now who are calling for an independent investigation. And I like to use the Amy Cooper effect. I like to use that framework to then look at the 5 touch points in the Amy Cooper effect. Would be look at interview or sourcing and interviewing and hiring, right? That process. And then look at promotion and performance appraisal processes, and then look at all of the processes that have to do with vendor selection and procurement, and then on up to, even board selection. And so for the corporation who is down that end of this, of the spectrum, then I think that's where you're seeing real, corporations wanting to really have real change. And that's where they're cleaning house, and they are reviewing and revamping the way that they do everything and all things, and the way that Black people have been on the outside, for forever and a day. So
you hit on some really critical points that I think our audience, many of whom don't understand the scale at which a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company operates. So first, you made a very important point, which I've made in conversations with people, that often these major announcements of $50 million or $25 million being earmarked toward a quote unquote Black cause, whether that's supporting Black businesses or whatever, is money that was already in the budget anyway.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not sacrificial. This is like, we were going to do this quote unquote for our Black diverse spend. Let's reposition that and promote that as our response.
Yep.
It costs us nothing.
Yep.
The second thing, when you talk about scale, is that when you're a multi-billion-dollar business, to an individual, $100 million obviously is a lot. I'd love to have 100, but for a Fortune 1000 company,
that's right.
$100 million is not really, again, anything's better than nothing, but it's not. Right. It's not huge. But that last point that you've made about the spectrum of what's credible, authentic response in this space versus what's a good visual response is in a Black enterprise, as you know, we measure diversity effectiveness, and we're looking at 4 things: workforce diversity, general workforce diversity, leadership, meaning executive management diversity up to the C-suite, vendor and supplier diversity, how much money are you spending with Black-owned companies? And then you talk about board diversity. And if you're hitting all four bells, and very few companies, you know, based on our measure anyway, say that you hit all four bells credibly, then you can look say all the right things and look like you're responding when you're not really, and I like the word you use, sacrificial. It's not a real investment above and beyond what you're already doing.
That's right. That's right. Particularly if you think about the $1 billion roundtable, right? Those corporations who are at that level. And then also I would add one component to those four that you mentioned for the D&I index that is extremely important. It is however they market and advertise the agency component. Because if you look at where there have been some, I will say, foul or a flag on the field in terms of corporations, cultural incompetence playing out, Pepsi, right, when they did the commercial a few years ago featuring a reality star, and it was, you know, the Pepsi is going to solve, you know, the injustice of the world. It was a slight against, you know, Black people and Black Lives Matter. And then you have an H&M, you have, H&M with the monkey on the sweatshirt, monkey of a Black boy on a sweatshirt. And then you have Dove. There was some Becky sitting in that office and thought that marketing campaign of Dove, where a white woman would be there and she would wash and a Black woman would wash and become a white woman. She thought that was an amazing idea. And so, and then Macy's has even, you know, had a hit where in some of their marketing and advertising, every ethnic background in terms of a family had a mother and a father, but then when there was the Black woman and children and there was no father. And so my point is that fifth piece is however it is that they are marketing and advertising, right? That's the consumer, that front-facing piece is also the other way to measure, you know, whether or not corporations are, you know, being responsible with addressing, you know, systemic racism. That's a big part of it as well.
In fact, you make a great point. One of the surest signs that there's no diversity in decision-making in an organization is when that messaging gets out and nobody realizes that it's horrible messaging, because there was no, either there were no people of color or no Black people in the room, or the Black people in the room weren't there to be respected and listened to for their expertise. They were there to just be representationally diverse, but not decision-making diverse. And I would add to that, and I don't know why I didn't think of it first time, because obviously Black enterprise has a stake in it. When you look at where companies spend their marketing dollars in terms of Black media outlets, Black-owned media outlets, because that's kind of falls into the diversity spending and the media spending aspect. But you can one of the surest signs that a Black person was not in the room, all those examples you laid out, either they were not in the room or they were in the room and said, this is not a good idea. And everybody was like, forget that, it is a great idea.
That's right. And what I say is they were not in the room and they were not in a decision-making position. They needed to be, if there wasn't any campaign specifically for a consumer group that is not of the majority, then that person needed to be in the room and they needed to be in a decision-making authority. So an example of, I think one example of some good behavior that you're seeing is Reddit CEO, Alexis Ohanian. He gave up his board seat, but he said, for a Black person, I'm going to give up my seat for a board, you know, for a Black person. So that's, you know, you see allyship and that kind of thing happening. Now that's a one-off, however, so we would need to see and maybe, you know, some policy or some MOU about maybe him or others getting together to make to maybe start a change or a challenge to get more Black people on more board seats. Because one seat, that's great, but that's one seat. That's not systemic, that's allyship. That's not addressing systemic racism about what the requirements are for a corporate board, let's just say, right? And so I don't know why that just came up, but I figured I'd share that.
Because, and as you know, we do an annual report on Black representation on corporate boards on the S&P 500, and then Needle has moved has moved to some degree. It only moved now because of the spotlight that's been placed on it.
Yeah.
But you're right. Often we will see an outlier example that
Yep.
you laid out.
Yep.
And it's a good example and it's great and we applaud
Great.
it and it should. But if it doesn't become a trend, then there's no systemic change. And I think that kind of gets to the core of why I wanted to have this conversation. These outlier efforts by corporations naturally are going to get a lot of press. I mean, Black Enterprise is reporting on them.
Yeah.
They're going to get a lot of press because they're outliers, but they can give you a false sense of real change.
Yeah.
The fact that they're outliers means it's not systemic. And if it's not systemic, then you're not talking about what really needs to happen in corporate America for them to really push the needle on this idea of social justice and racial equity.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me about how this is affecting, well, let's go before, let's do kind of a before and after. You were already doing this work for many, corporations.
Yeah.
This is not like it's a new
No.
area of business. But talk about the impact on your business, whether it's positive, negative, indifferent, and whether the pandemic adds to this mix. But what does that mean for diverse and engaged? The kind of work you were doing before, let's say the tipping point of the George Floyd murder.
Yeah.
And then of course, all the activity of the company trying to step forward. And like you said, we're Black Lives Matter, we're anti-racist. But now activists and others are saying, well, let's see where that really goes and whether you're really serious about that. What does that mean for you as a professional, as an expert and a consultant in this space?
Yeah, so it means our business shifted. So I'm measuring now, we're tracking before May 25th, God rest his soul, Mr. George Floyd, before May 25th and post May 25th. And so before May 25th, so my company, Diversity Engage, we speak 3 languages: leadership development, workplace culture, and diversity and inclusion. And diversity and inclusion was simply a third of our business. And, I like to say we get called in to do the fluffy stuff, not necessarily to address systemic issues. When you are a D&I practitioner, for the most part, right, there's maybe some people doing some different things, but when you get called in by a Fortune 1000, it's typically going to be to consult on strategy or to implement on strategy, right? And so I say, we get called in for a corporation who may not have a diversity strategy yet, and so we get some of that work, but 80% of our work is on implementing programs and initiatives where they don't really have strategy, they have language, but they don't have the capacity and the bandwidth. So that's just a third of our business. So before May 25th, we go in and do this work, unconscious bias training, which, many think that that's the end all be all. It's not. There's a continuum. There's cultural competence, becoming an ally, managing inclusion. It's also managing through a cultural lens, which sort of normalizes D&I, diversity champions. So that was all of the work. That's not necessarily systemic. It's good work, but it addresses, the individual in the moment. It addresses the need in the now, but it doesn't get at systemic. And so before May 25th, a lot of businesses, a lot of corporations were working on that stuff, the front line, addressing, to some extent, they'd say workplace culture. That's essentially what they were doing. That's not systemic. And the reason I know that is in my other hat, which I've shared with you with the National Association of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, over there, there's real systemic work, right? But that's not this frontline work. So that was my work before May 25th. And what was always interesting to me is we would get called in and, but the corporations were rarely really interested in doing the real work and listening to, the people of color and Black folks. And I've seen a lot of Black folks having to posture what their challenges were and not really able to talk openly and freely about discrimination and racism. They always use this soft language and such. Post May 25th, we're not talking about diversity and inclusion, Alfred. Everybody, this is not D&I. This is not diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion talks about the workplace. This is about race relations. This is about racism against Black people in America. And so our work is essentially about race relations, although we get the calls for diversity, but we know they may not necessarily understand, no, this is now, and so we manage that language and we help them to understand the breakdown and to move from the uncomfortable to comfortable conversations around race. But right now, post May 25th, it's race relations. And here's why. Since May 25th, we now get to be Black people in the workplace. Before May 25th, you couldn't be Black. You were diverse. You were multicultural. You were underrepresented. What did you say?
Minority.
Minority, diverse, underrepresented. You were a person of color, a woman of color, a man of color. You were not allowed to be just who you are as a Black person and say it, at least from where we sit. Do you see this? Yeah. Baby, post May 25th, for the first time in history, we are talking about Black people. So when we get invited to conversation, now certainly we're managing this, but I've even sat in on some live streams that were really, really awesome and amazing, but I'd hear the slip of where you started talking about Black people, but then you would hear women of color. Nope. Sidebar, we're not talking about women of color. We're not talking about people of color. We're not talking about diversity, because here's the thing, Alfred, diversity was the problem, because diversity is a big bucket for people who are not able to be themselves. And diversity in many sense in terms of corporate America is talking about, to some extent, the oppressor, right? White women are included in the diversity bucket. And so we go back to an Amy Cooper, and I'm sure everybody here knows that we had at the same time the George Floyd scenario, but what was powerful for corporate America, Alfred, is that we had the Amy Cooper effect. Why? Because I believe corporate America would have spoken out against racism, perhaps, but they wouldn't have had the framing of racism exists in America, but it lives in corporate America. And that's what Amy Cooper gave us, right? Because do you see what I'm saying? Like Amy Cooper.
Hopefully, I believe everybody knows the story. But Amy Cooper was a white collar professional executive who in Central Park, a Black man dared suggest that she should put her dog on a leash. And she rolled right straight to what I call them Miss Alice. No, they call her Karen now.
Karen.
Straight, get on the phone, get teary-eyed. I'm being threatened by a scary Black man. Yep. Which of course, all kinds of triggers for the way police would respond to that.
Yeah.
So you're right. That was the lens of, here's the way we're being perceived by white corporate America, in this case.
That's right.
A white woman.
That's right.
And that same dynamic that happened in Central Park could be a dynamic that happens in a staff meeting.
That's right. That's right. So the Amy Cooper effect, which our company, we founded the framework for corporations to be able to take that Amy Cooper experience. And, I should say this, she apologized. And so, we certainly believe in, let me come on back. We want to leave her with her integrity. She apologized, but she gives us great context and a great opportunity for a lesson learned for corporate America to now take the spirit of Amy Cooper, because she worked in super white conservative investment banking. Now let's track that back and let's look at everything that Amy Cooper touched. She was probably on sourcing or recruiting and interviewing panels. And now that we know over here in her external life, the racist, right? Okay, so now independent investigation, we want to see for every Black person who interviewed and she was on a panel, let's see what the outcome, let's pull up the numbers. And then for every promotion or, again, that same path. So my point is that gave corporate something solid in terms of evidence to support all of our Black brothers and sisters who have been saying, I didn't get the job because I wasn't a culture fit. It wasn't the right fit. Or my salary was, 20% less than what they would have offered. Or I didn't get the promotion because, or, it's just all of that is now validated and verified to some extent as a result of not just George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Philando Castile and Eric Garner and Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and Corinne Gaines. It's not just because of that, but now she gave us that framework. And so let me just pause here because I get really, really.
No, this is what I wanted. That's why I called you, sis. You know, and let me just say this. I remember when we first started talking about your business, Dee and I go back, so I won't bore you guys with all of our past conversations on a wide range of subjects. But I think I remember telling you I love the title diverse and engaged, even for the name of your company.
Oh.
Because in corporate America, it can be representationally diverse, meaning there are diverse people in there, including some Black people.
Yeah.
And we're included because we're in the room.
Yeah.
Or we're on the brochure, or we're, you know, in the advertising.
Yeah.
But we're not engaged.
Yeah.
We're not there to
That's right.
be engaged, right. And we're not there to engage. We're there to represent so that it puts on the good look from a branding and reputational standpoint. And so your point about the real work, and now because of everything you just laid out, the real work was less before, and now it is the real work. It's like, you know, you have Black people, you need to see them, you need to hear them, you need to listen to them, and you need to value what they contribute to the organization.
That's right.
And if there's one thing that's a little different, I don't know if it's a tipping point different than what we're going through right now, but like you said, now we can be honest. Yes, I'm a Black man in your organization. Black. You're going to see me. We're not going to dance around it. We're not going to use euphemisms.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that you made me feel uncomfortable. I'm going to say you said something racist.
Yes.
We're going to get that on the table and deal with that. And like you said, before that, I don't think that in corporate America, you weren't free to do that.
We're free agents. We could say that, but our peer group that are in corporate America, they're not going to have a conversation. They're going to frame and posture, right? And they're going to go, if I submitted a proposal, let's just say if they called me in and I submitted a proposal and I said Black people before May 25th, they would probably say, well, Dee, actually, we would have to change that, or I wouldn't get the call back. I wouldn't get the call back because I'm talking about Black people. Well, you told me you have issues as a Black person, but what we would do is now we've got to fit into this nice, comfortable framing and languaging. I mean, the same with Latinos, to be quite honest, Latinx community. We could go off and have that conversation. Same thing. That's a nice, I mean, we're not talking about them right now, so I do want to hold the space for Black people. But when we get to them, that's the same thing. Latinos is a label, a language, and a bucket that was adopted by the US Census in 2010. Why? What does that do? It doesn't allow for a Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican to just be. Can they just be who they are? No, it's a nice, neat bucket. So let me come back to Black people. So right now, our business is, of course, through the roof, and it's good. I will also say, in all due respect, what I love about right now, it is unfortunate where we are, but it is a wonderful opportunity. And this is historic what's happening because corporate never spoke out on this. But this is not about Black versus white or white versus Black. This is about everyone versus racism. And so even if you are a white male or female and you're tuned in to Black Enterprise, just know this is not heat and energy because there is a white versus Black. This is everyone against racism and white supremacy. That would be a better way to frame it because you see, and we know we have white people in our network, lovely brothers and sisters who happen to be white. And so we're clear. But let's just be clear on the majority and kind of the origination of, transatlantic slave trade and cultural trauma. But right now we're getting those calls and it's wonderful. I've had to expand my business. I've had to expand my team. Everyone else who I know who's in the space, we are like, oh my goodness, I got a call yesterday from a sister friend in Dee C. She's like, I'm drowning. Do you have any people on your team, any bench members? So this is great and wonderful, but I think the real measure will be year 1 and 2 as we track May 25th, 2021, May 25th, 2022. Here's going to be the measures you all are already tracking. So you all's report, Black Enterprise report this year versus next year, you'll be a first responder to be able to see the numbers in terms of representation, but also those big checks that were written to social justice and civil rights organizations. Now, if they continue those checks, right, then we will know, because a one-off is a one-off. right?
Yeah.
I will say I have seen super conservative Fortune 10. By the way, a lot of these corporations who donated, they are donating to existing work, so they're not putting any additional burden on these nonprofits for the most part. But I've even seen a few of the corporations come back and say, what you're doing is great, but I need you to go in, and it's okay to talk about voting. It's okay. That's not been done before. Corporations don't want to get involved for the most part in voting and that kind of work. So literally we have clients who receive millions and they said, yep, just put this towards your current work. That's what a lot of that was. But like I said, one or two came back because they didn't see the voting and the census. They didn't see evidence of something that would be systemic. And they asked, they're like, no, we're going to need. And so I think that was very promising that you do have some of them. So let
me ask you this, particularly in terms of the issues facing Black entrepreneurs, both those who were in business and are negatively impacted by the pandemic, Black businesses that were struggling even before there was a pandemic, and even Black businesses that weren't struggling but weren't able to scale. I mean, people.
Yeah.
When you look at the nearly 2 million Black-owned businesses in this country, the vast majority of them are sole proprietorships.
That's right. That's right.
So the growth in the number of businesses is great, but if we don't achieve scale, then the economic impact is negligible. And so you talk about the money that's being offered and earmarked by large corporations. And my thing is, in the entrepreneurial space, when a company says, okay, we're going to put $100 million toward helping to launch and grow Black-owned businesses, and I tell people that's a pledge, because without a system put in place for that money to get actually into the coffers of those businesses, and I was in a private call with a major corporation, I won't name the corporation because of the call, where one of the challenges we challenged them on was like, you earmark all this money, but then the barriers that you put in place to get access to the money, there's no proprietorship that has the administrative resources to actually get to the money. So you get the big bang, reputation bang for putting out this announcement that you put $100 million out for small, or Black-owned businesses. Yeah. But nobody's going to check to find out 5 years later, none of that money got spent because it's a pledge. It's not a,
That's right.
To give to a charity. Nobody's tracking to see if you ever actually made the gift.
But you look good in the moment, pledging $100 million. You look good in the moment, and
amazing. You get awards. You get awards for the pledge.
Yeah.
So talk about. I mean, you work very closely with entrepreneurs, both within the, your business, but in general, you've spoken at Black Enterprise events.
Yeah. So I think the unfortunate thing that again this I think has to do with the layers and levels and complexity of the oppression in this country. I heard a statistic that 41% of Black-owned businesses went out of business during COVID. So it was from a reliable source, so I take it, and I know And then I also heard in that same conversation, private conversation, about, I forget if it was 300 billion that had not been dispersed to small businesses. Don't quote me on the number, but if that money had gotten out to those small businesses, they would have been able to survive the pandemic. And so again,
that first round of PPP money, most of it did not get to businesses. I mean,
no, it didn't.
In fact,
it did. No, we know. And I want to put a pin there and come back to that, because I think that would help this conversation as well. So I'll talk about from an entrepreneur and business owner perspective. And I'll talk about it from the perspective that, so some of the work that we do, because we do well in delivering programs to engage, I'll say, African Americans, multicultural women, African Americans, Latinx. So I do specifically a women of color program. So WeBank is a client. We do work with Dee C. In fact, our business has expanded even in that regard, developing programs specifically for women of color business owners. Why? Because specifically for African American owned businesses, we are the largest segment, the fastest growing, but you said it, Alfred, but we are, the numbers, it's a sad story in that we are the least in terms of employer owned firms and not in the 2% club, and the 2% being businesses that generate, you know, over 1 million in receipts. And so that is an unfortunate circumstance. Now I am partnering with a nonprofit, and so it'll be public in a couple weeks, but really to, I'm going to say, have a conversation about Black women specifically, Black women entrepreneurs specifically, and what is the problem with this idea that we are the largest and the fastest growing, but yet the numbers don't line up. And so that is important for me. And I'll share this for everybody here in that, you know, I had a conversation or had an idea about how to use my voice in this time, because I think this is a wonderful opportunity for everybody, wherever you are, to participate and to be on the right side of history. And that is, what will be your story and your response when there's a conversation about a global reckoning of racism against Black people in America in 2020, right? And so now we have the opportunity to speak up and to speak out where appropriate and where it makes sense. And I think in your space. And so just wanting to really speak to this issue about Black women business owners, largest and fastest growing, but not getting the contracts, not getting the opportunities, having so much, you know, so many barriers in terms of, right, bias and stereotypes. And so that's really the space where, you know, I'm excited to see change. I'm excited to see what's going to happen in supplier diversity. I'm excited to see what's going to happen in procurement, right? Because that's also a place where there needs to be levels of accountability in all areas of representation or all areas of a firm. Now, you said it as one of your four, it's vendor supplier diversity. And so that's a place that I am super, you know, interested in seeing us, because again, Alfred, before May 25th, as a woman-owned business, in all of the spaces that I play, guess what? I couldn't be Black, Alfred. I'm a woman of color, or I'm a WBE. I can't be a woman of color. I can't be a Black woman. I am an MWBE. I'm a minority woman business owner. I'm underrepresented. I'm minority, diversity, multicultural, and the list goes on. I was on a call a couple weeks ago. We meet every Tuesday night with some boss women, and Coca-Cola executives were on there. Janice Bryant Howroyd were on there. And I shared that for the first time, we could be Black women business owners. And after that, one of the Coca-Cola execs spoke up. She said, yes, Dee, I'm so glad you said that, because I don't know what multicultural is. Wow. And so, and then AARP spoke up. Brother man who sits on the board of the $1 Billion Roundtable. I probably shouldn't say that because not that many brothers, so you would know, but he's a sharp dude. He's sharp, he on the back end in the chat, he said, yep, exactly. And what I mean by that, and the reason I'm sharing is, this is our time to speak up and out, and then to rally around and to support us in owning our identity and being okay, and to educate people like, no, we're talking about Black people right now. And I'm Black, and I'm blackity, black. I'm Black in February, but I'm not just Black in February. In fact, don't call me any longer for your Black History program. Call me, if you can't call me in March and June and July, you know. And so again, I think from an entrepreneur or business owner perspective, we still need to see this time next year that something happened in procurement, in the supply chain for Fortune 1000 companies, where there's this huge disparity with Black people in particular, or Black people in general, and Black women in particular, that there's something that happened as a result. And so I don't know if I answered your question about.
You did. I mean, you know, in the time that we have left, we kind of wrap up. From your unique vantage point as Blackity Black woman entrepreneur, but a true expert regardless of gender and race in this particular space. I mean, from your time on Wall Street to your work in the tech community to your work in the Hill. I mean, again, just a very unique trail of experiences that feeds into every important aspect of the American economy, from policy out of Washington to the tech community.
Yeah, yeah.
What should we be looking for? And this goes right to the reason I asked you to be on Beyond the Hype. When we're looking at these announcements, when we're looking at what happens, to your point, over the next 2 years, 21, 2022, what should we be looking at for corporations to be able to tell who's for real, who's really making systemic change, and who is faking the funk?
Yeah, I think it's policy changes and transparency. So, because the transparency is the accountability. So what we should be tracking is was there a policy change, whether it's an HR policy, whether it's a promotion policy, whether it's a sourcing policy. We want to see, those are the two things, in my opinion, that would let us know, right? And so you could look at, I'll say this time next year, we could just look at the D&I index that you all put out. And if we see representation shifted, that might be an indication that there was some change. But if we see representation, there was no change, then what happened with the policy? And if a corporation did nothing, it's going to be shame on them. And they are really playing a risky game, because right now, people in America, actually people on this planet, are woke as can be. It used to be Black people were woke and conscious. Baby, the globe is watching. And so people all over the world, and it makes me a little emotional that everybody joined this fight for the most part, which is why I say we are amid a global reckoning. This is not a national reckoning. No, this is not East Coast. No. The global reckoning of racism against Black people. And you have to make sure, you have to hold the space up. There's racism, and who are we talking about? Because, people can twist all kinds of against Black people, where? In America. And so, but I will share this one last point, where there's the greatest opportunity, and I don't think we play enough. So, right, I'm a Wall Street alum. I trained $1 Million Producers on Wall Street for many years, and God really set me up. I was there on September 11th, and then I went to work for a church, but he happened to be the Secretary of State, first Black. And so I was set up. I got sort of, I live and work at the intersection of business and faith. And then I always say, I'm not political, nor am I apolitical. I just have a lot of friends who are. And so I wound up playing in this space. I wound up going to Dee C because I was invited to speak. And so God set me up. He continued to pull me in closer. And so here's the greatest opportunity, and what I want people to know. I think the opportunity is on Capitol Hill. The opportunity for us is to no longer believe in us being specialists, meaning whatever your work is, if you're in the corporate space, that's your space. No. Everything's your space where your people show up. In particular, it's the people who you pay their salary. So it's your elected officials. And so where there is great opportunity, I think, for more of us to meet with our representatives, to be seen and heard and visible in the halls of Congress, to have real conversations, to share our public interests, whether it's security in schools. You've got grandbabies. Alfred, do we talk about this? Yeah, you don't have no grandbabies?
Yeah. Not yet. That wasn't me.
I don't have any kids. But anyway, but my point is, you have children. I know. So whatever your interests are, our role is, if we're not protesting, it's donating to organizations that are protesting. But it is also to mobilize our people to the poll, completing our census, running for office. Now it's people, y'all need to run for office. Everybody, locally. Yeah. Now we all can't do that. We need everybody play their position, and some of us can play on the outside and support you on the inside. But running for office, but more so, I started this initiative, Diversity on the Hill, last year. And so second Thursday of every month, when the government is open, we invite leaders to come to the Hill. I can't even tell you how powerful, I just didn't know how powerful it would be to launch this initiative and to get leaders to just go say hey to your congressperson. Do you know them? And they'll say, he doesn't know me. They need to know you. They want to know you and your name. And this is how the other folks get stuff done. And so I had no idea. When you go to meet with your representative, the conversation will be in this 15-minute meeting, what's your ask? What do you want? And they mean that genuinely, and they're going to take out pad and pencil because now they work for you. So on their to-do list is your name. So if you say you're interested in sex trafficking or, because maybe you've had a situation, drugs in school, guns, whatever it is, they work for you. If you say as a business owner, hey, because this is Black enterprise, I'm gonna tell you something. Let me tell you something about business. In fact, I just sent a letter. Well, I'm not going to tell all my business. Your representative, no, I will tell this. My representative asked me, are you working with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so? I said, no. And they said, well, would you like to? Because, we could send a letter of inquiry. What? The opportunity that exists to support your representative and for them to support you is the opportunity that we have to participate and to be part of the systemic change of racism. I'm just going to say that. And I wanted to throw that in because I don't think enough of us, those of us who are educated and smart, intelligent people, savvy people, y'all need to go, listen, join us, Diversity on the Hill, or just go and introduce yourself to your representative who works for you. They want to know you and you want to know them, and you just want to know how you can work together. They need to see your face. And so I'm gonna stop right there, but I think that is the biggest missed opportunity.
It's a perfect place to stop. And I had a very powerful conversation with my son on Father's Day. My son is a young adult, 28, living in Westchester.
I think I thought he had babies, not Mo. I think I thought your son had
babies yet.
Okay. Keep going.
He's engaged. I'm sure something's coming, but at some point. But my point is, we were talking on Father's Day, and he talked about how powerful it was. He participated in the protests in Westchester, and he did. He was very impressed with how well organized it was, and they were focused on message. He's a Black enterprise kid, so
yeah. What'd you expect? Yeah,
so yeah. They have an expectation about whether it's going to be right or not. He was like, no,
that's right.
And then he said to me, but Dad, really, I'm interested in what happens when the protests die down.
Wow.
Where am I going to insert myself?
Wow.
Where's going to be the systemic, again, and so to hear that from a young person who understands, yeah, hashtags are important. Yeah, social media is important. Yeah, the protests are absolutely important. But the systemic change, again, he talked about local elections, organizing, what is going to happen when this moment, quote unquote, ends?
Yeah.
And it speaks to everything you're just saying. And that's the ultimate goal of the show, Beyond the Hype. Yes, the excitement is hot.
Yeah.
CNN is hot. Hashtags are hot.
Yeah.
For all the wrong reasons, unfortunately, because the hashtags of people who are dying.
Yeah.
But the real work is what happens on the Hill, what happens in local government, what happens in terms of that work and engagement that is not going to get you a bunch of likes and clicks on Instagram, but it's the real work that needs to be done. So perfect way to really look at what we need to expect and require of corporate America, but also what is going to be required of us to work in partnership with that to get what we need to get done.
Yeah.
Dee, thank you so much for.
Oh, you're welcome, my friend.
I called you a couple of days ago. Was like, you want to do my show? And you were like, yes. Sure. But this is everything that I really expected, because again, I know the important work that you're doing. I'm definitely going to try to have you back on, because like you said, we need to come back in 2021 and be like, okay, what happened?
What happened?
Yep.
Accountability. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dee, for being on.
You're welcome, my friend. This is good.
Yep.
All right.
Alfred Edmond Jr. with Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining us for Beyond the Hype.